Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Saheem the Dream, back again with another video. So, not too long ago, I was on YouTube and I was looking at some videos and I came across a video where Stephen Richards had came across a video himself, a video from Inside the Ropes on YouTube, and they had Bret Hart there and they were just talking to him about some of his opinions on wrestling, and they mentioned the three infamous names, or one of the three infamous names you should never mention when you're sitting down with Bret Hart. They mentioned Triple H. And if anybody knows, if you mention Hulk Hogan, Triple H, or Goldberg, Bret Hart goes Super Saiyan 10 and begins to just start pulling out his pink and black shovel and dig a hole or dig multiple holes for that particular performer. And in the video, Steven Richards kind of sided with Bret on some things, and then other things he kind of seemed like he was in a gray area. But the purpose of this video, I was just in between about Bret Hart because he's one of my top five wrestlers, and I really just want to talk about, just Bret and where he's at. Is Bret bitter? And the truth about Bret's bitterness. Is there some truth behind it? Well, personally, I found out that there is some truth behind it when I analyze Bret's personal opinion with the business. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. What? Wrestling in the ring, thoughts that always bring. Talking all about the moves and our grooves. Wrestling talks and thoughts we never forgot. Slamming down the truth in our booth. Conversations in the air with flair and care. Legends of the past, memories that last. Wrestling talks and thoughts, connecting the dots. From high flyer to submissions, we make our missions. From Raw to SmackDown, we wear the crown. NXT to AEW, we bring the view. Wrestling talks and thoughts in our slots. Fans united, always excited. Wrestling talks and thoughts in our spots.
So, throughout Bret Hart's illustrious retirement, it seems like whenever you bring up Hulk Hogan, you bring up Triple H, and you bring up Goldberg, Bret cannot help himself but to just go in. You give him a mic, and the conversation is going downhill as far as what he thinks about these guys. What stuck in the back of my mind was every time Goldberg, Triple H, or Hogan got the mic, or not got the mic, but whenever they were sitting across from an interview and they were asked questions about Bret Hart's opinion on certain topics that Bret Hart addressed, they always spoke about it from the business standpoint and never spoke about it from a personal standpoint. And I can't help but look at just how these guys are addressing the situations versus how Bret Hart is. It seems like Bret Hart just took everything personal rather than looking at the decisions that were made based on what was best for the business at the time. There was a comment that Shawn Michaels made to Bret years ago in the ring before he left WWE in 1997. And he says to Bret in the middle of the ring, and it seemed more like a shoot comment than it was something that was scripted for TV. And he says to him, he says, there's a part of you that feels like this wrestling thing or this business is yours, like you possess it, like it belongs all to you. And you're the person who somehow has the right to deem what is good and what is bad. It keeps feeling like every time Bret Hart gets the mic, it's like he's in that place. It's like he's stuck in that place. And for some reason, he's locked up in this self-righteous prison of what is good and what is bad that he can't seem to get free from. Well, today, I'm going to get all you fans free from Bret Hart's prison of bitterness, because I honestly believe that what's going on in Bret Hart's mind and in his heart right now is pure bitterness. And the truth of the matter is, when you go back and watch, as a matter of fact, the interview that he had with Inside the Ropes, where it talks about, it was their latest interview they had with Bret. Bret Hart mentions about holding on to a bag of rocks and about how forgiveness and bitterness is about holding on to a bag of rocks. And you don't want to walk around carrying these bag of rocks. You want to eventually let them go so that you can feel lighter. And that in itself kind of shows how Bret Hart took the business way more personal than he should have. But let's get into it. So, Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan is the first person that will be on this list that I will mention. And before I get to Triple H, which is really the main topic of why I made this video, because in the Inside the Ropes interview, he goes in on Triple H, which is the reason why I was inspired to make this video. I'm going to start with Hollywood Hogan. Bret Hart, who is at the heart of this matter, who can't help but just lose his absolute mind when it comes to mentioning Hulk Hogan, who's number one on this list, right? So let's just talk about Bret's issue and just get into it, because I don't want to keep you guys here long. So Bret Hart had an issue with Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 9, where Hogan was brought in to supposedly help Bret Hart get over with the fans and get over as a top babyface in the business, because Vince McMahon had deemed Bret Hart as being the guy who would lead the new generation of up and coming performers, right? These guys are supposed to be young, hip, and cool, and supposed to be this class of performers that would outdo the former class, which is part of Hogan's golden era. Hogan was the guy who led the golden era. He was the guy who made wrestling mainstream. He's the reason why we have wrestling on Netflix, big time cable shows, and we have big time pay-per-view buy rates, and the reason why wrestling is known in mainstream media as it is right now. He is the guy who made that possible, right? As I mentioned before, Hogan was brought in, according to Bret Hart, to be the guy to put Bret over as this big babyface, because Hogan was the big babyface prior to, who had elevated the business, right? This is according to Bret Hart's account as to why Hulk Hogan was brought into WrestleMania 9. Now, if some of you guys are not familiar with the Peacock documentary called Becoming a Spectacle, it's a documentary that Peacock did about WrestleMania, primarily focusing on WWE and when they started to make themed focus WrestleManias and how they were making WrestleManias bigger than what they were originally. They begin to break down the business aspect as to what actually went on behind the scenes and how business was doing at that time when they were building this whole entire event, right? They mention that the investors, or Caesar's Palace, the ones who was hosting the event, thought that Hogan would be part of the event, right? They explained that the reason why Hogan was brought into the event was because it was upon their request. Now, when you watch the documentary, you begin to see that prior to Hogan actually being asked into the event, they show that Hogan was sort of pushed out by Vince McMahon, because Vince McMahon felt like Hulkamania had ran its course and it was time to pass it on to someone else. So we had Ultimate Warrior prior. That didn't work out as well as Vince thought it would. So then we moved on to Bret Hart, which was around 92, right? So Bret Hart would be the guy who would lead the charge. So unfortunately, Bret Hart wasn't the guy pushing the company back into the mainstream forefront that it once was in its former glory days, as Hogan was the leader of the golden era, right? And pay-per-view buy rates, merchandise, all that stuff would decline, right? So what happened is, when they actually booked the event at Caesar's Palace, ticket sales were not doing as well as they thought it would do. So they had to find a way to, kind of boost ticket sales. And that way was to bring back Hogan, because Bret Hart, being the guy who had held on, or who was holding on to the world championship, was not boosting ticket sales. And Yokozuna, being the guy who was in rivalry with Bret Hart, wasn't drawing as much as they thought would draw as well, right? So Bret Hart had big boots to fill in regards to trying to walk in the same path and uphold the company, or push the company back up to its former glory as Hogan once did, because Vince McMahon was seeing that things were changing and how the times were shifting. So he moved on to Bret Hart, right? And he was moving on to someone new. But at the time, Bret, being this new superstar, wasn't really moving the needle as much as he thought he would. As a matter of fact, it would be on record that as time progressed, that Bret Hart didn't really do as well as they thought he did. As a matter of fact, Bret Hart actually did the worst as world champion in regards to who were champions around that time. And that's Hogan, Diesel, Shawn Michaels, and Yokozuna, right? So these were like the pivotal guys at the time who held on to the world championships, but the primary guy was Bret the Hitman Hart, right? Vince had all this invested stock into Bret, thinking that he would be the man, and unfortunately, it wasn't working. Because of the investors wanted Hogan to come back in, they brought Hogan back in. Guess what happened? Ticket sales go back up, pay-per-view buy rates go back up. People see the return of Hulk Hogan. Everybody's excited. The event is sold out. And now Vince has now made his money and he made the investors happy. But what's told in history by the eyes of Bret Hart was that Hogan came in, he schmoozed his way, he he was politicking his way into the heart of Vince McMahon. That's the word he wanted to use, and made Vince McMahon have Yokozuna drop the belt to Hogan. Hogan would hold on to the belt and not drop the belt to Bret Hart so that Bret Hart can get this magical rub that can make him the mainstream star that he always thought he could be, right? But the truth of the matter is that Bret Hart held on to that title before Hogan got into the picture. And if Bret Hart was going to be a mainstream star from the get-go, once he held on to that belt, we would have seen a difference. You would have seen an increase. And the fact of the matter is that afterwards, after Bret would hold on to the title, after WrestleMania 9, ratings would not increase. Pay-per-view buy rates wouldn't increase. It would be Shawn Michaels who would be the one that Vince McMahon would choose to be the guy to lead the charge after Bret Hart. And as a matter of fact, as history would show, in ratings, merchandise, and pay-per-view buy rates, every time Shawn held on to the title, ratings would increase. Business would do a lot better when Bret didn't have the belt, which is a sad, sad, sad story to say about someone who is one of the greatest performers of all time. Now, Ric Flair would actually go on a record to tell the truth about Bret Hart. And some people would hate on the fact that Ric Flair actually exposed this and said, Bret was a great performer. He was one of the best, but he was not as good for business as he thought he was. And that's the truth. Bret was not as good for business as he thought he was. And that's the thing that I look at and I say, is Bret really bitter? Because he had an expectation as far as what he thought he would do. And he looked at the promises that Vince McMahon gave him and thought that because of Vince McMahon's push and pull as far as the promotion, that would make him this big superstar as big as Hogan or bigger than Hogan, but that didn't happen. So it's only based upon the star power that star is able to produce that will make business better. And Bret Hart was not as big or was not able to achieve the level of success that Hogan was. So when I look at what Bret Hart feels and what Bret Hart has said over the years in regards to Hogan being this politician and politicking his way into the heart of Vince McMahon and not allowing him to have this match against Hogan to give him the rub that he need, because somehow in Bret's mind he felt like the sweat on Hulk Hogan's body would rub off on him and he would now become, Super Bret, brother. And then he would start selling out arenas and all this other stuff. For some reason, Bret Hart felt like this match was going to give him the magical rub that he needed in order to make him this big superstar, right? And Bret was mad and felt like Hogan was politicking behind the scenes. And that's the reason why he did not get this match against Hogan that would have pushed him to the moon and would have put him over. When I look at history, the reason why Hogan came back pretty much because of business being bad, because Bret had the belt and business wasn't as good, right? But again, as I mentioned before, if Bret really had the star power to really take the business to the next level, it wouldn't be by the graces of Hogan putting over Bret that would have made Bret a bigger star. It would have been because Bret was a star already. You have to be a star before you get to that position. So let's take Stone Cold Steve Austin, for example, right? Stone Cold Steve Austin is a perfect example of you not needing a superstar's rub to make you a superstar on the level of the superstar you're trying to be like, right? So this is what Bret's argument was that Hogan didn't give him the rub to job out to him, and that Hogan would have been embarrassed because he would have embarrassed Hogan in the ring because of his super technical Canadian skills. He would have embarrassed Hogan, brother, and and he knew, and this is what Bret is saying, he knew that he would have embarrassed Hulk Hogan, so that's why Hogan didn't want to wrestle him, right? But there's some old footage of Hogan being very technical in the ring. But anyway, Hogan realized that being so technical in the ring wasn't the thing that was really selling. It was him doing his 1 2 3 1 2 3 that was getting over with the fans, and it got over with the fans, and hence we have wrestling in the mainstream, right? Who's right, who's wrong, right? But when we get to Stone Cold Steve Austin, right? So Stone Cold Steve Austin was already a star prior to him even having his match against Bret Hart. Now, some of you are thinking, okay, it was Bret Hart that really put Austin over, but it wasn't Bret Hart that put Austin over. Austin put Austin over, but it was the famous Austin 316 promo that he cut at the King of the Ring that would make him the superstar that he was. And Bret Hart seen it, Vince McMahon seen it, all the performers in the back seen it, and all Bret had to do was just put the pieces in the right place to show Austin as the tough SOB that he was, and which he did, where Austin didn't tap out to the sharpshooter and had the blood running down from his face, and that was iconic enough to help Austin be the guy that he was because the chips were already in place. We already knew that Austin was this tough guy, right? So how great would it look to have Bret Hart, who is this, top superstar, go against this tough guy who we know is tough and prove how tough he is by not topping out to his finisher, right? That makes Austin look like a superstar. So the pieces were already in place. But the point I'm trying to make is that Austin was already a superstar before that even happened with Bret. And not only that, but he lost to Bret. He lost to Bret the Hitman Hart. So Bret the Hitman Hart wanted to beat Hogan in order to get this rub, right? But here is Bret saying to Stone Cold Steve Austin, because it went on record that Bret said this to Austin. He said, I'm going to make you a star. And how he made him a star was he had him lose to him in a match. He had him lose to him in a match. That was Bret's plan. He had him lose to him in a match. So when you look at Bret's logic, it's like, something's not right. Something's a little fishy. Somebody has their own agenda. And it seems like it's Bret who has his own agenda. Bob Backlund, for example. Bob Backlund, Vince McMahon Sr., who wanted Bruno Sammartino to put over Bob Backlund. So he wanted Bob Backlund and Bruno Sammartino to have a match, and he wanted Bruno Sammartino to job out to Bob Backlund to put him over as a big baby face. Bruno said no. Bruno said no. He said, you don't have a wrestling background, buddy. He said, you're not an amateur wrestler. You don't know Roman Greco wrestling. You don't do what I do in the ring. He said, so therefore, you're not qualified to be the top guy. And that jumped out the window. That went out the window. And Ivan Koloff would be the guy that would take the belt off of Bruno Sammartino. And then Bob Backlund would take the belt off of Ivan Koloff. And hence, we have Bob Backlund's infamous title reign where he became world champion for about 3.5 years, right? So Bob Backlund didn't even get the rub that he wanted, or the push, or the political, jobbing out of the big superstar to put him over. But Bob Backlund was a star, right? Like even Hogan. Let's take Hogan, for example. Hogan didn't get the rub from Bob Backlund because the same thing that happened to him with Bruno Sammartino, he actually did to Hulk Hogan. So Vince McMahon wanted Bob Backlund to job out to Hogan to make him the world champion as the new face. Now, at this time, Hogan was hot as fish grease. Like he was cooking. He was on fire, right? He had just did a movie in Rocky 3. Hulkamania was going wild. The AWA wanted to sign him as a champion, but he decided to go over with Vince because Vince had a plan and Hogan was in on it. And Vince was like, I'm going to make you a star. But Bob Backlund said, no, you don't do what I do in the ring. You don't have a wrestling background. Bob Backlund literally would not drop the belt to Hulk Hogan because he didn't have a wrestling background. So the same thing that Bruno Sammartino said to Bob Backlund said about Hogan. So they had Bob Backlund drop the belt to the Iron Sheik. The Iron Sheik held it for a month, and then Hulk Hogan would beat the Iron Sheik in Madison Square Garden for the World Heavyweight Championship, and thus we have Hulkamania. So Hogan didn't even get the rub, but guess what? Guess what, ladies and gentlemen? It gets better because when the WWE needed a new superstar who would fill in for the position or the role of Hulkamania, right? The first person they wanted It was the Ultimate Warrior. Yes, you guys know it was the Ultimate Warrior. And what did Hogan do? Hogan did the job because Hogan felt like Ultimate Warrior had the goods, but also he did the favor for Vince McMahon and said, you know what, I'll do it because this guy has the goods. This will keep the business going good. And then maybe sometime down the line, we can revisit a rematch and we'll have a match against each other. Because actually, what was supposed to happen was Ultimate Warrior was supposed to have a rematch against Hogan. I believe it was the following year or sometime down the line, but they were supposed to have a rematch and Hogan would win. But long story short, Hogan did the job. Hogan did the job to Ultimate Warrior. And did Hogan's magical Hulkamania sweat work for the Ultimate Warrior, brother? Did it work for the Ultimate Warrior and the maniacs or whatever you call it, the Warriors, the little Warriors? Anyway, did it work? No, it didn't work. It didn't work because Ultimate Warrior would try to hold Vince McMahon for money. He would eventually get kicked out of the WWE, forcing him to leave and then come back about 2 years or 3 years later, and he wouldn't look the same. And people thought Ultimate Warrior was on crack, or he was a clone version of himself, or he wasn't the real Ultimate Warrior. And fans did not jump back on the Ultimate bandwagon, and they didn't care for him anymore. So anyway, that flopped. So here's Bret Hart wanting this rub from Hulk Hogan that Hogan didn't receive, Austin didn't receive, Bruno Sammartino didn't receive, Bob Backlund didn't receive. All these big stars that came before him did not receive it, but Bret wanted it, right? And Ultimate Warrior was one that did receive it, and he flopped. And he flopped because the principle of the matter was if you are a star to begin with, you will be a star in the end. And that is the issue that I believe that Bret Hart has, is the fact that there were all these expectations placed on him and he did not fulfill those expectations. But ladies and gentlemen, it gets so much better than this. So much better than this. Now, Triple H. Triple H, the guy who Bret Hart loves to dig a hole for. The guy who Bret Hart just seems to not get enough of. And this is my perspective about Bret Hart and Triple H and why Bret Hart feels the way he feels about Triple H. And it's jealousy. Bret Hart is jealous of Triple H. But it's not just an ordinary jealousy. No, it's not an ordinary jealousy. It's not just a jealousy of, you have what I want. It's not that kind of jealousy, right? It's not just that kind of jealousy. It's a jealousy of, I didn't expect you to be as big and as great as you are, but you are. Not only are you as big and as great as you are, but you've accomplished way more than I ever did. And you did it better than I could have thought about. That's the jealousy that Bret Hart has towards Triple H. Let me explain. In every way, Triple H surpasses Bret the Hitman Hart. Every way. More championships, more classic matches, more WrestleMania appearances, better booking, and he created more superstars than he jobbed out to. When you look at everything on paper, Triple H is better. If you look at everything on video, Triple H is better. Bret Hart is indeed one of the greatest in-ring performers of all times. As a matter of fact, Bret Hart is probably, I think he's like my top 5. He's in my top 5. My point is that when it comes to the business aspect, I really believe that Bret Hart keeps taking everything personal and not looking at the business aspect, which keeps conflicting with his emotions in regards to what actually is reality and what he thinks is reality, right? So in regards to Triple H has done everything better than Bret. He has. He's done everything better than Bret, right? You can argue that Bret Hart has had better matches. You can argue that. I wouldn't even argue that much with you about that. I could say, yeah, I could probably give it to you. But me personally, I wouldn't give it to you because I can name a bunch of matches compared to what Bret has done that is either as good or probably better in regards to matches compared to Bret Hart and Triple H. But that's my opinion. You guys may have a different opinion. Everybody is subject to their own opinion. But nonetheless, my point is when you compare who did everything better and who actually was able to succeed more and do much more with what they had, it was Triple H. Oh, it's because he married the boss's daughter he was able to accomplish much. It's because he married the boss's daughter that, he was able to get to where he got because he was with the boss's daughter. And of course, that comes with perks. He has all the power. He has Vince McMahon in his right pocket. The fact of the matter is, Triple H was always qualified to be a big star prior to him marrying Stephanie McMahon. Case in point, the Attitude Era. Attitude Era was because of DX and Stone Cold Steve Austin, but primarily it was because of DX. DX was the reason why we had the Attitude Era, right? DX had the Attitude Era. They were able to relate to the kids. They seen where the business was going. Bret Hart didn't see where the business was going. If you go back and you look at the old interviews, Bret Hart would argue about how DX would come out and just act like degenerates, which is the reason why they got their name, and they would appeal to a younger audience who was actually slipping away, and which was the reason why wrestling had gone into a slope. But it was because DX that WWE was able to compete with WCW, who was beating them in ratings because they had the NWO. And the NWO was beating them in ratings because the NWO was able to capture the young and the old audience, right? But WWE was able to capture more of the younger audience and then brought some of the older audience over with the Attitude Era, right? So Triple H was part of the Attitude Era. Guess who wasn't really a big part of the Attitude Era? Bret the Hitman Hart. He was there in the Attitude Era, but when we talk about what made the Attitude Era, you have DX and you have Stone Cold Steve Austin. Those three guys were the guys who made the Attitude Era. That's a fact, right? Now, Bret the Hitman Hart was there in the Attitude Era, but he wasn't the guy trying to push the envelope for the Attitude Era. He was too busy being bitter at Shawn Michaels. As we all know, the reason why, Bret and Shawn had their bitter feud. And if you guys look at the old footage about how Bret just hated Shawn and called him a prima donna and was just bitter then, that's where Bret's focus was. It wasn't about pushing the business to the next place. It was about keeping the business wholesome and old school and keeping kayfabe. And while DX was like, yo, Triple H and Shawn Michaels like, we're going to push the envelope. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Let's try this. Let's try that. Let's try this. Let's try that. Right? They were pushing the envelope. That was genius. That was qualifications to see exactly where the business would go, the next place and where it should go. That would actually be a reflection of his future and how he would do and exhibit great booking in NXT that would rival SmackDown and Raw for about 3 years. 3 years. So again, before Stephanie McMahon actually got into the picture, Triple H actually had that great genius business mind, knowing exactly where the business was going, right? With DX. And then he becomes this big heel. He becomes this great heel that was needed because you had The Rock as a babyface. You had Stone Cold Steve Austin as an anti-hero. Here comes Triple H. He's like, I'm going to be a heel, and I'm just going to be a heel. I'm going to be, the most despicable, disgraceful heel, one of the best heels you've ever seen, but not just a regular heel. I'm going to be a heel that's going to beat and defeat your heroes, right? And that's something that was needed because at the time, Austin didn't have a real rival other than The Rock. And Vince McMahon was looking at how Austin's rivalry was going and who his competitors were, and he didn't really have any big competitors. Who he had? The Undertaker, and he was always beating The Undertaker, right? And then he was always beating The Rock, right? So if you look at The Rock's record against Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock has won 1 match. Stone Cold Steve Austin has won 7, and 2 matches are no contest. You guys do the math, right? So they needed a big heel. And that was in the form of Triple H because Triple H already had the goods. He came into the business as a heel. He was working great heel work as DX. And then they said, you know what? Who better than Triple H, right? Because prior to him actually being the game, that big heel, right? Shawn Michaels had left, right? And DX could have folded. But guess who decided to say, you know what? I'm going to carry on DX and we're going to take it to the next level. That was Triple H. So he took DX to the next level. Now, I go back to the statement I made before, the jealousy part, the jealousy that Bret Hart seen Triple H as being no more than Shawn Michaels' lackey. He looked at Triple H and didn't think that Triple H would be as big as he was, and just looked at Triple H as just saying, you know what, this is a guy who's not going to be a top performer like Diesel, who's not going to be a top performer like Shawn or Razor Ramon. He's just going to be one of those guys who's just an average, heel who wins his IC titles and get jobbed out here and jobbed out there. That's the most he's going to do, and that's the best. And that's the highest he's ever going to reach. And that's how Bret looked at Triple H. That's how Bret looked at Triple H. And the fact that Triple H surpassed all expectations that Bret Hart had on him, that's what eats at Bret the Hitman Hart, is because Triple H wasn't still the guy that was carrying the bags, carrying Shawn and Diesel when they were drunk, being the designated driver when they would go to bars, because that's who Triple H was. He would carry their bags. He would be the designated driver. He was the responsible one. He was actually the responsible one, and they deemed him as the responsible one because he took care of himself, right? And that level of discipline that Triple H had was something that Bret Hart didn't see. And that level of discipline will be the discipline that would take him to the top. It wasn't his relationship with Stephanie McMahon. It was the fact that he was dedicated to his craft, and he was able to see a pivotal moment that when Shawn left and Shawn couldn't continue as the leader of DX, Triple H said, you know what? I have the discipline and I have the qualifications to carry this to the next level, because just like I was able to help Shawn where he was at in his low place, I'm able to help this group in a low place and bring them to the next level. As a matter of fact, there wasn't even a group yet. He recruited X-Pac. He got the New Age Outlaws. He already had China, and he rebuilt DX in his own image and then took him to another level. Now, so when you compare Bret Hart to Triple H as far as the trajectory of their career, Triple H did better. When Bret Hart was with the Hart Foundation, the Hart Foundation was good at that time, but who was better, the Hart Foundation or DX? You got to ask yourself that question, right? Who was better, DX or the Hart Foundation? Who took the company to the next level or helped the company get to the next level, the Hart Foundation or DX? We all know the answer to that, right? I don't have to answer that question for you, right? But there's going to be somebody who may think it's the Hart Foundation. Some guy, right? All right. Now, moving on to my next point, right? When it comes to Bret Hart, right, saying that Triple H buries talent. He doesn't have a sledgehammer, but he has this magical shovel, right, in his back pocket, and he pulls it out and he buries the talent that you love. He buries all the guys that are better than him on the roster, right? This is what Bret Hart's take on Triple H was that Triple H likes to bury talent that's better than him, right? This is the case, right? This is what Bret says, right? But when I look at Bret Hart's career, right, and I look at Triple H's career, I look at, okay, well, if Triple H is the guy who likes to bury talent that's better than him, well, how much of that talent actually suffered because of Triple H? And then how much talent actually succeeded because of Triple H? And then I look at Bret as well, like how much talent succeeded because of Bret, how much talent actually suffered because of Bret, right? So when I look at the factions, let's start with the factions. I'll start with the factions. So you look at the Hart Foundation. Who in the Hart Foundation became a world champion because of Bret the Hitman Hart? Was it Davey Boy Smith? Was it Owen Hart? Was it Anvil Neidhart? No, it wasn't. If you guys can find somebody that Bret was in a faction with, that he made a world champion and jobbed out to and made a world champion, mentored that person and made them a world champion, put that in the comment section below. But I can think of somebody who did. Triple H. Triple H had a group called Evolution. He brought in Randy Orton, Batista, made them superstars that would carry on as Triple H took the back seat. And he jobbed out to both of those guys. He jobbed out to Randy Orton and he jobbed out to Batista. He jobbed out to Batista at a WrestleMania, right? He jobbed out to Randy Orton to win a world title. He's done this. I can't name anybody that Bret the Hitman Hart took under his wing, mentored on TV, and said, I'm going to push you above me to make you a superstar and bring you up to my level. Triple H has literally made kings, made champions. How many champions has Bret Hart made? If any of you guys can comment that in the comment section below, I'll be happy to hear it. I'm not talking about somebody that was booked against him in a match. I'm not talking about who they're saying, oh, this is the next guy up. We're going to book you against Bret the Hitman Hart and you're going to beat Bret and we're going to make. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about somebody that was literally under Bret Hart's tutelage and became a world champion. And Bret Hart said, I'm going to prefer you over me. I'm going to take the back seat and I'm going to let you be the man on top. Name one person that Bret did that for. But I can name two that Triple H did that for. I can name two. Let's get on to the burying, right? So a lot of people talk about the burying of Rod Van Dam, Kane, and Booker T and Goldberg, right? And people started talking about like how his reign of terror buried talent. Oh, Triple H reign of terror. He buried talent. He buried Rod Van Dam because he's better than me. He buried Booker T in his racist promo. Oh, he buried Kane and Kane, was humiliated on TV, and he buried Goldberg because Goldberg was better than him. So these are the guys that Triple H supposedly buried, right? But if you guys do your research and you guys look at all those people I just named, they all are former world champions after feuding with Triple H. Hmm. Hmm. Very interesting. So this guy Triple H who buried talent, right? These guys will go on to be future world champions. So was it Triple H buried the talent, or was it Triple H was preparing the talent? So as far as the burying is concerned, I don't know. Now, John Cena buried talent. John Cena buried Wade Barrett. Now he's on commentary, but he could have been a world champion, and he could have fought John Cena at a WrestleMania when he was the head of the Nexus, and that cycle would never come back around for Wade Barrett. And John Cena didn't advocate for Wade Barrett in the back so that he can get that opportunity again. So that's burying talent. That's what you call burying talent. You have the opportunity to put somebody over while you're at the top. And you know you're going to get that opportunity again. But here's a guy that you can bring up to your level so that you can have a better show, so that you can have more matches, greater feuds, more entertainment. But you decide, no, I'm going to keep you where you are so that I could be at the top and I just be in the spotlight. And it's all about me, 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 because you being opposition for me, it doesn't matter as long as I'm the star. And that's what burying talent is. How many people was able to produce the talent under jobbing out to Bret Hart like Triple H? I'll wait for somebody to put that in the comment section below. I can name Stone Cold Steve Austin. I can name Shawn Michaels, right? But those are the only people I can think about. If you say Owen Hart, if you say the British Bulldog, these guys will be glorified mid-carders, right? Not in a bad sense, but in the sense that they would never get past the mid-card division. The only person that was even close to the heavyweight championship division was the British Bulldog when he came back in, I believe it was 99 or 2000. If anybody can name somebody that Bret Hart has brought up through the ranks and made a world champion, please, I would like for you to mention that, because it's not just on paper that Triple H was better. It's in real life that Triple H was better. It's in real life. Now, here goes the jealousy, right? Now, people deem Bret Hart as one of the greatest in-ring performers. But guess what? Guess what? Guess who's actually booking matches? Because if you look at someone who's like a great in-ring performer, like the likes of Shawn Michaels, right? He's a guy who's down in NXT booking matches, right? He's down there running a show. He was with Shawn Michaels and he was with William Regal running NXT that would compete against Monday Night Raw and SmackDown. And guess what? Guess what? Guess what? Bret Hart wasn't there. Bret Hart wasn't booking any matches. Bret Hart wasn't producing any great talent after his likeness. Bret Hart wasn't giving anybody any pointers at NXT to make them the next Bret Hart. No, Bret Hart wasn't doing that because Bret Hart was too busy doing interviews with other outlets complaining and crying and being bitter about what happened to him in the past and is not manning up to the fact that he can't take accountability, that he couldn't fill the shoes of Hulk Hogan, he wasn't a draw, and that he was not the guy that can see where the business was going. That's the truth about Bret the Hitman Hart. That's the truth about bitter Bret, because all those things I just mentioned that Triple H was able to do. And as a matter of fact, Triple H is booking WWE. All right. You guys drop your comments in the comment sections below. Tell me what you think about Bret the Hitman Hart. Do you guys feel like Bret the Hitman Hart is jealous of Triple H because Triple H is now a top booker and he's not considered as someone that they call on to come in and book matches? Do you guys feel like Triple H is being hated on by Bret because Bret didn't have as many world championships, WrestleManias, classic matches as Triple H? Or do you guys feel like Bret Hart is completely justified in feeling the way that he feels about Triple H? Bret still holds a grudge against Goldberg. As a matter of fact, Goldberg even mentioned the fact that after the whole incident where he gave Bret the concussion that caused him to retire, they spoke that same day. And then they spoke a day after, and they spoke multiple times. But Goldberg is getting frustrated, or Goldberg got frustrated because he says that every time Bret has an interview, he buries him. And Goldberg is like, where's this coming from? Like, we spoke about it. I apologized to him numerous times, multiple times, but every time he does an interview, he can't help himself but to bury me. But guys, that's bitter Bret. A guy that I consider a great legend has fell victim to the bitter woes of what his career could have been, right? He wasn't able to be good for business in WWE, and he wasn't able to be good for business in WCW. But guess who was? Hulk Hogan. If you guys got a comment, drop it in the comment section below. Let me know what you guys think. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.